Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. I'm Joe Marcello, and today I have the privilege of bringing you our interview with an author who I've been a huge fan of for quite some time, and his career spans Marvel, DC, CrossGen, IDW, and Dynamite, just to name a few. I'm talking about none other than Scott Beatty. You may be familiar with Scott's work on Robin, Nightwing, and Batgirl Year One, as well as his work on numerous DC Encyclopedia series and other collected editions, such as Buck Rogers, The Phantom, and Sherlock Holmes. We get into that and so much more in this interview. So, without further ado, let's get to it. This is Scott Beatty. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Joe. How are you?
I'm thrilled. I'm great. I'm very excited to talk to you. Been a fan of your work for a very long time. And I'm going to kick it off the same way we do with everyone, is ask you, how did you first discover comics?
How did I first discover comics? I had I guess a breezy tangential kind of association with comics when I was very young. I can recall when my parents got their first color TV, and I was able to watch the Super Friends on in color, like circa, I'm going to say 1974, somewhere around there. I liked superheroes from the start, and my first comics were DC comics, and the story that is true and verifiable is I was in the hospital in '77 for pneumonia, and all my cousins went to see Star Wars, and my brothers, and I didn't get to go. And my dad brought me some comic books from the hospital um, gift shop. And I remember the three comics. It was an issue of Richie Rich. I don't remember the number, but it was a Richie Rich, Secret Society of Supervillains from DC, and Batman Family. And
Wow.
I was hooked. Thereafter, I was just hooked. I couldn't get enough comics. I scoured the local Five and Dime, uh, Sheets way back. We have it's an East Coast kind of 7-Eleven kind of store. Any bookstore, any flea markets, any town kid in the small town that I grew up, I pestered if they had comics, and I was hooked. I was hopelessly addicted.
Do you still have any of those?
I do. I have the Secret Society of Supervillains and the Batman Family. I don't have the Richie Rich. Otherwise, I'd probably know the issue and the stories. I'm thinking maybe Richie got into some shenanigans involving money,
Ta- That's a
and he had a
very
lot of it.
strong,
Yeah, and
strong
maybe
possibility.
Dollar went along and Cadbury went along for the ride.
There, and that's pretty much the series. Um, So, at what point did you take your fandom and decide you want to turn into a career?
Um, I majored in creative writing in college. And at the time, I'd been out of comics for a while, but I was working at a radio station. That was like my college and graduate school job. The way I supported myself was working for top 40 radio stations. I'm really fortunate that I was given the opportunity for both because, I love rock radio, pop radio. But I used to do some weekend long hour shifts where I babysat the the board while we played these long play LPs that had Scott Shannon's top 30 countdown. So you'd sit for like 15, 20 minutes while he did like, number 38 through number 35 on the top 40. And I used to take comics with me. I got back into it after kind of a lull in college for lack of funds, and so I would grab a couple issues of stuff that I knew and loved before, like X-Men, Batman, Titans, stuff like that, and that helped to keep me occupied while I babysat the top 30 countdown.
I,
So I guess I wasn't really thinking about it that much in college. I went off then to grad school for creative writing. And somewhere along the way, I just decided that I wanted to try to break into comics. And I had met some people. I went to grad school in Iowa, and I met Doug Hazelwood, who was a Superman inker at the Des Moines Comic Con. And I asked him for some names of some DC editors who would take a look at something that I sent. So I sent off a pitch at that time. This is probably 1993, maybe 92. to Mike Carlin, who was then the executive editor,
Mhm.
and it was a pitch for Titans. Teen Titans had ended. This was before the Zero Hour Titans had come about,
Mhm.
and I had an artist friend, and we did a 10-page story. I had a full blown script, and just a revamp of the Titans. I sent it off, and a couple of weeks later, Mike called me at my office. I was a teaching assistant, and I taught freshman English at ISU while I was getting my degree. And Mike said, "Hey, we got your pitch. Don't quit your day job." And I was crestfallen, but he stayed on the phone with me for, I don't know, probably 40, 45 minutes. And he talked about the state of the industry. This is the 90s.
Mhm.
So we had the big bust following all the hologram covers, multiple covers. This is after the baseball card bust. Like everything was just, being downsized. And he said that, I was picking the worst time in the world to break into comics, that they were laying people off. So, there was a redemption point there. And at the close of the conversation, he wished me luck and he said that he was returning my pitch unread, dot, 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 but we're using the atom. And so I thought, well, okay, you wouldn't know that unless you read my pitch. And of course, all companies, major companies, don't accept unsolicited submissions, but he took the time to read it.
Mhm.
So I crestfallen, hung up the phone, thought my dreams were shattered. And when I graduated, I taught for a year and then I applied for different jobs and I got a job working at Wizard, uh, the comics magazine. And
Mhm.
I was hired as a copy editor, but the proviso was I was moving all the way back east in order to kind of launch their toy magazine, ToyFare. And while I worked at Wizard and while I worked at ToyFare, I was making connections at DC, and I had met Chuck Dixon, um, because I called up Chuck and I said, "Hey, we're going to the International Toy Fair in New York City, and we're going to see the new Batman and Robin figures. And I understand there's a Bane figure, the first ever Bane action figure. Do you want to tag along? And you can kind of give the creator's view of his first action figure." And Chuck did, and we sort of maintained a relationship after that, and we started like co-writing together as a result. So at a certain point, I quit working at Wizard and Toy Fair and thought I'd embark in freelance on my own. And I started getting more projects. And to kind of bring this story full circle, a couple of years later, probably 2001, I'm sitting with Chuck and Mike Carlin and Denny O'Neil at the Chili Factory in Manhattan across from DC Comics. And we're pitching Joker Last Laugh. And Mike's all in. He's like, okay, we're not just going to do a mini series. We're going to make it a fifth week event. It's going to be a company wide crossover. We're going to do the whole thing. And I'm like, okay, I made it. And at the close of the conversation, I said, Mike, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, well, you're Scott. And I'm like, yeah, but do you remember calling me and telling me not to quit my day job? And he said, well, obviously you didn't take my advice. So and Mike's the kind of guy who just has just that deadpan sense of humor. But he said, obviously, you made good, kid. So well done. So that's how I broke in essentially.
That's
I mean, when I started freelancing, I just started getting more and more stuff, and some of it hit, and did well. So that's kind of how it works. And if you hit your deadlines and you have stuff that sells, you keep getting work.
right. I want to take a step back and discuss Toy Fair.
Hmm.
One, because there's not too many publications out there that maybe want to spend money more than Toy Fair and previews.
Right.
And I mean, my girlfriend, who then became my wife, I mean, I'm sure she was thrilled that that magazine stopped being published because I was just, I would see things. I'm like, look at it, it's so cool, and I'm gonna buy it. And she's like, no. But how did that come about? And what was like, like what goes into something like that? I mean, you're working at the, Wizard, which was just an amazing magazine to begin with, highlighting comics and artists and up and coming creators, and it was really great. And of course, when they would cast movies, which I would think was the best, and then they have this companion magazine all about toys. How did that come about?
Well, obviously, you and I are the Toy Fair generation, the
Yes.
Wizard generation. I mean, I'm looking at the background of your office, and I see the wall of Supermen.
Yeah, I
And
got a
if you
whole
look
nother
behind me,
got a shelf over
over
here of stuff problems.
you got the Shield, and I'm looking. I've got my Migos and my
Yes,
comics and everything.
so cool.
So Wizard, it's taken me a good long time to really appreciate the legacy of Wizard. When you're working there, it was crazy. It had sort of a fraternity, Animal House kind of atmosphere. Lunches were at foosball tables in the lobby or video games after work. And I was a young, newly married writer, editor, and I kind of went home at the end of the day to be with my spouse. But a lot of bachelors working there, and most of it, the lion's share of everything was kind of from the twisted imagination of Pat McCallum. Pat's gone. He passed away a couple of years back and is dearly missed. But it's just he loves that stuff so much. He loved comics and toys, and he just didn't want to take it so seriously that like I don't know, it was about being irreverent. It was about loving it but realizing that it was meant to be entertained. um he opened his toys, like even though we had a price guide. I mean, we read comics. There were comics everywhere. We got DC, Marvel comps from every company. And when I took over the toy chest feature in Wizard, it was with the understanding that they were going to expand, because they had already done Inquest, which was the gaming magazine, and the next industry to take out and take down was the toy industry. So I started building contacts with major companies, Hasbro, Toy Biz, and kind of let them know what we intended to do. And then we just hit the ground running. But um, the uh, the mission statement of all the magazines was to report on it, but have fun. And I think we had looked at other toy magazines, and that shall remain nameless, but like the full size magazines that were they had news, had pictures, and were glorified price guides. And we thought, well, how do we make an entertainment toy magazine? And that's what evolved into all the pictures of toys behaving badly. Mego Spider-Man becoming our unofficial mascot, and then laying the groundwork for Twisted Mego Theater, as it was called in the beginning, and then later Twisted ToyFare Theater. And of course, you're probably well aware that that became Robot Chicken.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, the guys that worked like in and around Toy Fair, and the ones who were Tom Root, uh, uh, Robot Chicken writer and co-founder, was my second hire after Tom Palmer Jr. for the magazine. We had a
Wow.
three-person staff, and Doug Goldstein, who worked for Wizard, and Pat McCallum, they wrote Twisted Mego Theater all together, and Matt Senreich, who was the founder of Stupid Buddy Studios and was kind of the brainchild of Robot Chicken, kind of realized all the talent there, and then kind of went off and made friends with Seth Green, and then took them all to Hollywood, where they've been kicking ass ever since, if I can say that. Um,
Definitely.
the what's interesting, I just saw recently that Robot Chicken's on its 21st, oh my god, 21st season. It had just concluded.
I
you
didn't even
know
know it was still. Yeah, it was still like airing new episodes. It's been a
yeah,
while since I've watched Adult Swim, since a lot of those other shows had kind of gone away. But yeah, that's a fantastic show.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it had that same reverence of love of toys, but also they're meant to be played with. So
Yeah.
that sense of fun was what really drove it. And it's funny because I mean, all the Wizard publications were they were shrink wrapped. They came in bags, and of course
Hmm.
the bags enabled foil cards, AOL discs, stickers, all that kind of stuff. And we worked really hard to try to get into Toys R Us, the late great Toys R Us, but some of our content was sort of, TRU prohibitive, because we had, fart jokes and, sexual innuendo. And, but I mean, that was really sort of I think that was what made the magazine successful, because in just a few short months, we outsold, the competing publications. And we jumped into like the second best-selling Wizard title uh, very quickly, like outselling Inquest, because that was even more of a genre publication. So tons of
Yeah.
fun. We did it with the Wizard people photographing. We had a photographer, Paul Schiraldi, who came up on a freelance basis, but eventually we just had to make him a staff member. Like he would drive up for a day and just shoot action figures the entire day.
Oh
That was his
wow.
job. Yeah.
Was that created? Was
Oh,
that
sorry, my
published
dogs are
over?
barking.
Oh, it's her. Was that published and created with the same place as Wizard? Because I know Wizard was done not too far from where I live. I live in Westchester. I think it was
Oh yeah,
in
Connors.
Rockland. Or, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, we were in a kind of an industrial area. We were right behind a company called the Well-Bred Loaf. So every morning, the smell of baking bread greeted us. So it was a good place. And huge building. I mean, we needed the warehouse for all the publications, and that's also where we shot all the. We had a photo set up in the warehouse, but just to house everything, all the comics and toys and gaming cards and everything. So it was a really cool place to be.
It,
And I'm appreciating it more now because with time I can appreciate the legacy. I don't think we would have Avengers films and Marvel Cinematic Universe or any of the collectability that we do today if not for what Wizard built, Wizard Entertainment, and then with all the publications. So with perspective, I realize that we kind of laid the groundwork for modern fandom.
I miss those magazines. I look forward to those sometimes more than the actual comics, just because of the perspective, things to look out for. They were fun, and it was great. I was very sad to see those go away. Um,
I mean, it's I mean, it's not a secret story, but the Wizard Brain Trust had the opportunity to go online and to go digital as magazines sales were flagging, all over, and they didn't think the internet was a thing. They thought it was a trend. I mean, I'm sure that there's a more complex answer from them, but they missed that boat. And the other thing is that um, you know they Matt Senreich took the concepts for Robot Chicken to them, with the idea of creating like Wizard TV, and they
wow.
had some early stop motion that became Robot Chicken, and a family feud with Star Wars characters, I think, versus Star Trek characters, if I recall it correctly. I just remember Chewbacca doing a little dance at the end, and this was live action. This was one of the guys, I think it was Doug Goldstein in a Chewbacca suit, that that the brain trust passed on. Like they couldn't see the future, which
Wow,
is because I mean they literally created the future with Wizard and ToyFare and Inquest, but they couldn't see beyond that. So,
that's
but
unfortunate.
they made money on conventions for
Yeah.
a long time.
So to jump back into your comics career, um, at what point did you move into? Well, you mentioned working with DC, but you got heavily involved in a lot of Year One, which I
Yeah,
absolutely adore. I mean, such
thank you.
great series. Um, First off, is why those specifically, and when you're creating those stories, what is your overall goal?
Well, at the time, I think I had pitched the idea of a Robin Year One to Chuck Dixon, and Chuck had the very smart idea, and it became part of our pitch to DC with the question of why is it that we don't have a bookshelf of these? And this was when Batman Year One was the only thing. And I think
Mhm.
maybe even prior to us, they did some annuals that were Year One annuals, but like they didn't have an entire slate of Year Ones across the board for every single character. So that's how we went into it. And we pitched Robin Year One with the idea that hey, this is the next book in the series after Batman Year One, because that even at that time, I mean, what, it came out in '86, and we're looking at 2000. 2000 is when we pitched Robin Year One. So 15 years of that being published and republished and republished, but nobody had done the next one. So Chuck said, we need a bookshelf of these. And so we went into Robin Year One and we pitched it, and they bit. We got started on it immediately. We were paired with Javier Polito, who gave it that great retro style art that I think has made it kind of evergreen. It has a longevity that other like more modern or current art styles don't have. And the idea going into it was we didn't need to retell the origin. I think that's been kind of our operating principle for all the year ones is that people know it. I mean,
Hmm.
if you have any, any base knowledge of comics at all, you know Robin's origin, or you understand that he was selected to be Batman's second in the war on crime. So I think at that point we had, I think the Gauntlet had come out, and that sort of uh, told the story of Robin doing his final test to become Robin. So we thought, okay, well, we don't need the origin, we don't need to show his final exam. Let's show the first year. And it had been established in the comics that Two Face had, at one point taken Robin out of the equation. And so we went into the story thinking that this needs to be the first year of Robin. We can use, whatever villains we wanted, have fun with it. We can show just why he's, Batman Squire, um, because he gives him hope in the face of hopelessness. And, there's going to be good times and then it's going to get dark. He's going to get fired, and it's not going to be the first time he gets fired, but he gets fired and then he has to prove himself. And so we took some ideas like the League of Assassins and some of the pre-existing Bat continuity, and we sort of kind of shoehorned it in a bit without rewriting the origin. We didn't change where he came from, what his name was, or anything else. The goal was to be consistent with Robin's history, because I think me more than Chuck, I'm a history guy about DC continuity. I don't want to override it for the sake of stroking my own ego. Um, I think that a lot of that stuff is sacrosanct. That it is and always shall be. And my goal writing any DC character has always been, when I put him back on the shelf, he should in some way be consistent with the way he was for all time. So so that was
That's
the
what
goal, to tell a good
that's what
story
Paul
that
Levitz told us, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah, his
I can see
pretty
that.
much exact words. I didn't mean. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it
Yeah,
just
no, no,
when he says, we let writers come in, they write a character, do whatever they want with them, but when you're done, leave them the same way you found them. Which if you think about all these various iterations of characters, they'll go through their trials and tribulations when a new writer comes in, and then they kind of go back to the way they were, and then a new person comes in, it blows up, and it expands and contracts, and I always appreciate that. So
well, I think they're perfect. I mean,
yeah.
most of them are. You can recount their origins in 3 sentences, the best ones. And and I forget who said it. Maybe it was Chuck, who said that the best comic book, the best superhero designs are the uniforms that a 7-year-old can draw from memory. And we look at the characters now, and it's I don't know, so many lines. Back in the 90s it was pouches and tubes. But I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, as a kid getting into comics, when I sat and I drew from memory. I drew the characters' costumes and their emblems. I used to endlessly draw the bat symbol and the Robin symbol and Superman's shield from memory,
Yeah.
and to try to get that S just right. So that was the goal with Robin Year One, was to tell a good story, and I think that that's really been my operating principle. And the thing that I learned most from Chuck, I mean, I kind of had a mentorship under him, um, where he taught me how to write bat stories, and it was based on what Denny O'Neil had established in the Batman corner of the DC universe, like how to write a good Batman story.
Mhm.
Opening splash, the page turns are so important. Write to the artist. Don't have, pardon the phrase, diarrhea of the mouth, where word balloons and
Mhm.
text balloons or captions override the beauty of the art. I mean, it was words and pictures, and that's what I've taken with me, and it's what I teach students today about writing comics. Is it's words and pictures. It's the synthesis of the two, and ideally, a good story should be one that you can follow without the captions. Because the writer and the artist have just clicked. So for Robin Year One, that was the idea. And we had 4 48-page issues. It was prestige format. They all sold great. And, I think we were still, basking in the fact that that sold well when DC came back to us and said, now do Batgirl. So, um, with Batgirl, they wanted to change the format. They wanted to do 9 issues, which I guess kind of worked out to the page count the same way. It seemed like an odd number to me, but Marcos Martin, who was Javier's studio mate in Barcelona, did a little pinch hitting on issue 3 of Robin Year One because he could do Javier's style when Javier needed a little help meeting the deadline. And when we found out that it was Marcos, we actually had written we wrote the first issue assuming that we were going to be prestige format. So we had to take the first issue at 48 pages and cut it down to 222 pages. And then when we learned that Marcos was going to be drawing it, we went back to the first issue and rewrote it because we wanted to just let him breathe. We had we tried to cram a lot of story and we're like, let's just let him, do his stuff. And it was the best decision we ever made because, he's Marcos Martin. And this was before he was Marcos, he was just an up and comer, but man, I think the reason why that book, probably more than the other 2-year ones, is remembered so fondly is just that the art just from first page to final panel just sings. And I tell this story a lot. The fact is that when we saw the covers, and I don't know who made the decision. I got to think that it was Matt Idelson, the editor at DC, maybe with Marcos's idea. But you'll notice that on issues 1 through 9, the logo, the title logo moves on the page. And, the first issue, she's not in costume. It's on her boot. And that's actually an image that the Harley Quinn and the Emancipation of Harley Quinn film kind of, copied. They did a swipe for it for the poster for that. But the fact that it's in the middle of the page meant that retailers would have to put Batgirl Year One up front on any shelf that it was staggered that had comics where you just have the title behind each one.
Right.
And that happened for several of the issues, which meant that we were always up front. So, it meant for better shelf space. So from a marketing standpoint, it was really smart. So as far as the story went, Chuck and I went in with the idea that we weren't going to change Detective 359, her first appearance in comics from Carmine Infantino, that it was still going to take place at the ball, but we were going to expand it. We were going to expand the story after that. And we have a cameo from Elongated Man and Sue Dibney, who actually appeared in a backup in that original issue of Detective. And they were also at a costume ball, but not the costume ball. So we were trying to include a lot of different continuity. And I think the goal was, it's weird with prequels because you know where the prequel ends, and my big problem with the Star Wars prequels is that, he ends up a villain. I don't need to see him be a redeeming character. I mean, he killed Jedi babies. Yeah, sorry, guys. Darth Vader's he's a jerk.
What?
Yeah. So it's like we knew that she was at that time, Oracle, Barbara Gordon, was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And so we had to tell this story that somehow kind of just really made her career as Batgirl, shine. But yet led to Birds of Prey. And so, I went to Chuck with some ideas about how to insert some Justice Society characters because, of course, we had this continuity of Black Canary and, the cameos, I think, ended up being some of the really cool moments in it. The Justice League satellite, just, I mean, I have to admit, too, a lot of it was, fan service for, the writers.
Look, I mean, the writers are comic book fans, like you said, fan service for the writers, but I mean, they're the ones who get it, and they were like us, at one point in their lives. So, they're going to do it right.
I tell my creative writing students that it's all fan fiction. That every comic book writer is writing fan fiction because they were fans. And if they say they weren't fans, if they say they came from some other literary genre, they're lying. Like you don't just pop into comics and say you're going to do it. Like you were a fan of something, whether it was anime or manga or some cartoon. You kind of knew and loved that world. You're not slumming in the comic book industry. So with Batgirl, yeah, that was the thing, to kind of tell that story.
And what I loved about it is that I found an appreciation for Batgirl during that period of time, because prior to that, I'm like I loved Barbara Gordon as Oracle. She was just a solid character, and in my at the time at least, my opinion of Batgirl was soured as a result of the Batman 66, because just it was I don't know it just I was not a fan, and I appreciated the year one because it just it you're filling in those gaps of this is what happens in between, and they're really those series, the year ones really kind of delve into that period of time that really wasn't covered. And I found an appreciation for that character, Batgirl, that is. And it was a lot. It was cool. I really loved it.
Oh, thank
um
you.
and I like, they've kind of gone back and forth since, but um yeah, there was a great series. And then um the Alfred one as well, that was
Oh yeah.
very, very cool. Although I forgive me, I don't recall, was that wasn't titled a year one as also, though, but in
It
similar
was
in
pitched as a
style.
year one.
Okay.
Yeah. By that point, I think Chuck had gone to CrossGen full time.
Okay.
And so he was out of availability for DC stuff. And so I wanted to do Alfred Year One, and I had pitched it, and it was approved. And then they came back and said, you know what, we're not sure. This is long before Pennyworth, long before they thought Alfred could sustain his own book.
Hmm.
And so I was asked to do it as a backup in Detective. And then because of whatever story arc was happening in Detective, they said, well, we can only give you 2 issues. So, I went from like a 4-issue miniseries down to like, I think what amounted to 16 pages. So a
Wow.
lot got left on the cutting room floor for that. But, the idea is that, let's explore all the stuff that had been kind of hinted at over the years. I mean, there were stories where, Alfred was he was an MI6 agent during World War II with Lucius Fox, like he had an adventure in Mademoiselle Marie, and
Hmm.
way old Batman Len Wein story, I think it was, or Jerry Conway. So I just thought, well, it kind of makes sense. And this was, I think, before Jeff Johns did the Earth One story that had, Alfred as a former commando, and before
Right.
the Beware the Batman stuff that really kind of made him into Jason Statham, because he was the, the bald Alfred with the derby hat.
Right.
So I just thought, well, here's a chance to play with it, and I threw in some of the superpowered characters, and I loved James Robinson's Golden Age, that had the Spear of Destiny, which I think Paul Levitz had established back in All Star Comics, like that JSA origin with the Valkyries.
Yeah.
Um, so I just wanted to have some aspect of that, and that he was kind of the I don't know, I guess the manservant to the James Bond kind of character, and that that played into his acting and his abilities to blend, and just I don't know, I wanted to make him cool, and then kind of establish the reason why he went to Gotham. Like they had to put him deep undercover. So I thought that yeah, that we did a good fun story. And then when they did the Pennyworth
Absolutely.
series, and I found out that they were exploring the MI6, I contacted them immediately and said, hey, I think you owe me maybe a royalty or two. So
I I'm glad you brought that up because I wasn't sure how to. So thank you.
yeah, no, I got a creator participation credit, and
Good.
I'm in I think the second series. At the end, it's like thanks to Scott Beatty or something like that,
Oh,
or one of the seasons I got my name on, so I got to see my name in the credits.
nice.
So it almost happened with Batgirl, but
Oh, real? Oh, well, yeah. Then that didn't happen. So.
yeah, I followed the Leslie Grace film pretty closely, and there are scenes from Batgirl Year One, like the Infantino's costume shop where she buys gear. That's
Yeah.
in the film that was shelved and then archived, put in the vault. But um, I don't know. I've never seen the script, so I can't say like what, if any, if there was dialogue lifted. But there were aspects of Batgirl Year One, and then early on in the production, Leslie Grace showed a picture of herself holding Batgirl Year One,
Hmm.
and then quoting Batgirl Year One. So, during the whole production, I'm like, we made it. My late father, who was a steel worker and supported, you know, me writing,
Hmm.
he always asked me like, "Can you make a living at it?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to try." He would always ask me towards the end of his life. He's like, "So when are you getting a movie?" And I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
so close, Dad,
my
so
goodness.
close." Yeah.
Oh, man.
I just wanted to see my name as like the 100 DC creators that are listed at the end in
Yes.
the credits, like special thanks to everybody. Like, yeah, I just want to get up at the theater and be like, that's he.
I did. I'm that guy. That's me.
Yeah, and then we're like, sit down and popcorn in their
Okay.
face. So,
I want to ask, you have worked on some great, and if this is the wrong term, I
Joe, you're too
apologize.
kind. You're
No, it's uh, reference material, if you want to call it that, like the
mm,
encyclopedias, the secret files.
yep.
You said earlier that you love telling the history. Is that kind of how you got into creating these, which I have a few of,
Yep.
um, and others? Um, how did you get into creating those, and why, really?
Well, that's kind of how I broke into the industry,
Okay.
like not like scripting comics, but like the other thing. Um, so at Wizard, one of the features, I mean, it was while I was at Wizard, in addition to being a lowly copy editor and making a copy editor salary, I was brought on as a freelancer too. So I got to make money, over the books by like writing features for Wizard. The first thing I ever wrote for Wizard was Grant Morrison was relaunching JLA
Mm-hmm.
with Howard Porter. So, I broke the news on that and talked to Grant and, had to decipher his Scottish brogue for the readers. Um, but one of the things that Wizard wanted to do was to do these kind of voters guides to different fictional cities and comics universes. And so the first one was a guide to Gotham City. And so I thought, well, I can't just do it. I can't just do it from the comics. I wanted to have it be approved by DC, and Wizard had good relationships with all the companies. So I asked DC for the map, and they gave us kind of the official map that they were going to use, and I think that ended up being in No Man's Land and other things. And I went through, I did my research, went through all the comics, looked for place names. I think earlier there was a DC travel guide, maybe, or universe guide that Paul Kupperbrook had written. It was for one of the like Mayfair games, size like a trade paperback. So that had some stuff established too. So I wrote it all, came up with the different fictional things. DC allowed me to name like the founders of Gotham in it. I named uh, Bruce Wayne's, and actually I did that in the Secret Files. Bruce Wayne's grandfather, who ended up showing up on Pennyworth later. Um, so I didn't create him, but I named him. But so we did this whole thing. DC approved it, and I had to go through their bat offices. And Darren Vincenzo, who was a bat editor around the time of like Nightfall, Night Quest, No Man's Land, all that kind of stuff, liked what I was doing. And then when DC started doing the Secret Files, he called me up and said, "Hey, are you interested in doing some text pieces?" So I got to do the character bios, I got to do the timelines, and then from there they started like feeding me more stuff. So even before I started working with Chuck, Darren was one of the editors on the DCU Holiday Bash. So my first official scripted story was in DCU Holiday Bash 3. And Darren said, "Hey, you can do whatever you want. You just can't use the big guys, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, any of the, or Flash." So he said, "Be creative." So I racked my brain and I came up with the idea of Shrapnel, grade Z villain who had been last seen in Doom Patrol,
Mm-hmm.
was trying to bust out of the slab to go home on Christmas. And I was inspired by all those great holiday stories. My favorite is When You Wish Upon a Planetoid or something like that. It was from the DC Superstars holiday special. It was like the first Frank Miller art for DC was in that one, but it was a Legion of Superhero story where Superboy is homesick on Christmas and the Legionnaires try to cheer him up and they go and they save this planet from destruction. They save all the different inhabitants who have to work together in order to survive. So very heartwarming, all the Christmas tropes. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about peace on earth, goodwill, or peace in stars, goodwill. So my story ended with Shrapnel using whatever means he could to break out of the slab. He actually uses Multi-Man, who then became a player in Joker Last Laugh. We picked up that plot thread later, but he breaks out of the slab. He goes home to visit his twin children who are normal. They're not a giant heaping, pile of
Pile of
metal.
metal. Yeah.
Yeah, and he gets to see them sleeping on Christmas Eve, and then the feds show up. And so after they leave, you know, the comic camera pans in on the Christmas tree, and Shrapnel had left pieces of him as the tinsel on the tree. So I'm like, you know, Darren liked the story so much, he said, it's normally 10 pages. I'm giving you 2 extra pages. So I'm the only story in there that's 12 pages long as opposed to 10 pages. And then the cover is actually Shrapnel's face, his metal face. And then all the facets of metal are reflected like Christmas balls, the different superheroes who appear in it. So my first comic, I got 12-page story and the cover. So
That's
I look
awesome.
at it as an unqualified win. Yeah, it's probably one of my favorite things that I've done. It's clunky. I can see where I had room to grow, but following the secret files and then the DK encyclopedias, which were a crap ton of research, I was offered like 10-page stories, and I think that's kind of the perfect proving ground for an aspiring writer because you have to tell a complete story in 10 pages. You don't have a lot of decompressed storylines that used to fill trade paperbacks. Like they used to want stories to be 4 to 6 issues long so that they could collect it as a trade.
Mhm.
And a lot of those stories are just you can feel the filler, big panels, not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of things crammed into it. So
Right.
I got to learn about the economy of language, and because I had done the Batman Secret Files, I just kept getting more work, and I kind of got to be known as somebody who wasn't afraid of research, and also somebody who knew DC lore. I mean, I just from growing up, I could recite all the names, home planets, and powers of the Legion of Superheroes. So I'm a little rusty, because of so many rebirths and reboots, but
Yeah.
my classic comics knowledge is strong.
All right.
I
So we'll
mean,
go.
I'm Mark level. I mean, I'm Mark Wade level. Yeah,
That's pretty damn good.
I can
Because
take on Mark and Kurt Busiek too.
oh wow. So Mark, when had the chance to speak to him, told him I was the one of the biggest Superman fans out there. He said, "No, you're not. I'm the biggest Superman fan. You're number two, maybe." It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
thanks. That's not Mark
that's
Waid said
legit.
number
Yeah.
two.
Did he say, "Do you know Superman's social security number"?
No, he didn't, and
I
I
think
didn't
that's
know.
Mark's go-to for that. Yeah,
Is it? Oh, shit, I
yeah,
gotta find that out. Um, I love the encyclopedias because they are very much they remind me of the Who's Who, which I'm a huge fan of, and
me too.
collecting. I'm like I'm glad they came out with the the hardcovers, which I have those, but finding all the Who's for me was like it's still a goal, to find as many of those as I can, and there's so many, but they're great because I got my son reading or into comics through the encyclopedias because he's just he's new to the whole thing, and he's like, well, who's this character? I'm like, well, look it up, and it's just a perfect synopsis of the character, who they are, where they're from, any additional information. So anytime there's been a Who's Who over the years, or I'm sorry, a Secret Files in addition, I just go to it because things change over the years. They retcon, they make changes to the lore, tweaks here and there. So the Secret Files is just a great kind of palate cleanser. Like, well, this is what the new story is
Hmm.
for this character, and read this going forward and know this. Um, so yeah, they're great work. Um,
Thank you.
and it's
Joe, behind me, on those shelves, a little further back on another set
yes.
of shelves, is a couple bound copies of the original Who's Who,
Oh,
the 1986 version, and they were a gift from a staffer at DC who shall remain anonymous. When they were retiring from DC, they said, "Look in the mail," and sure enough, they'd taken their copies from their office,
oh
and I'm
wow.
probably not supposed to have them, but they mailed them to me, you know, many years ago as a
Wow.
gift as they were cleaning out their office. And it's my go-to for all of it because it's just that stuff it was set down in stone. It was
Right.
canonical. It has all the facts. I mean, it was Bob Greenberger and all of those writers and editors on it were scrupulous about making it, right. And I don't think there are many, if any, uh, corrections in that things that that were wrong, in terms of it. And as a I came to Marvel secondary to DC, so I read the Marvel Universe books, when those came out, and
Hmm.
those were great too because you had those great Elliot R. Brown cutaways, like the diagrams that then like we used in the DK books, like for the Batcave and the Bat vehicles and stuff like that. But
Those are
I just
amazing.
remember the Marvel books like went into the scientific level to describe like ACH and TC, adrenocortisol, that explained how the Hulk got big, and it wasn't just gamma rays. It's like no, like it went into the science of it as well. So that level of detail just always fascinated me as a reader because it made it real,
Oh yeah. The one that always sticks out to me about the Batcave is obviously, you have the kind of um you always have the giant penny and the T-Rex, but there's one of them that showed all the Batmobiles, and they're on
Yeah,
like this rotating almost like a carousel.
right.
So if he needed a particular, and they're all there, like the '66 version, like his original Golden Age, like like a variation of the Tumbler, an animated version. I'm like, they're all there. They are all legit. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because Batman's a gearhead,
yeah,
like he's got to have something. It's like, so he's going to keep all his cars. And
right,
like the car is the one thing that he puts the most effort into in all the crime fighting beyond his physique and his abilities. The car is the thing.
yeah. Oh, that
Chicks
was
dig the
great.
car.
Yeah, chicks take, and it comes full circle. So I'm glad you mentioned Marvel. You've
Mhm.
worked for many different publishers, and I was curious to know: is there one publisher that you really, you know, you would say they really gave you room to breathe? You had a chance to really spread your wings as a writer and do your best work. Is there one that really kind of let you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say DC first and foremost. I think with the success of the year ones, when I got Gotham Knights, they were doing the kind of the semi-annual changeover of creators. I was awarded Gotham Knights, and I wrote it for a year and a half. That gave me room to grow. I did Son of Vulcan, which was an original concept I took to them, and it was Paul who said, "Hey, can you do it with this Charlton Comics character that's laying fallow?" Um, but I guess for the most part, pretty much everything I pitched became something. I mean, I had lots of pitches that didn't, as I think all creators do, but I think my success to failure ratio at DC was pretty good. And I can't recall anything that was really ever shot down. I mean, I can tell you, about some things in Last Laugh that were changed from the original pitch that would have made it cooler, but I really had a chance to do what I wanted to do there. And then second would be CrossGen. Um, the opportunity to work with Butch Geis and Mike Perkins. Perkins now is a powerhouse. I mean, he's big guy in the industry, and he was inking back then, inking Butch, and Laura Martin on colors. I wasn't a CrossGen employee, a salaried employee. Like I held fast and stayed in Pennsylvania where I was living at the time because my wife's an English professor, and we just couldn't uproot. She had her
Mhm.
career, and I had just gotten Batman Gotham Knights, and I didn't want to give that up. I'm like, I can't just give it up to go down to Florida, and of course we know how CrossGen ended, but
Right.
I did fly down about once a month, and I got to hang with the entire creative team, and I got to hang out in the bullpen. And Mark Alessi's idea to replicate the Marvel bullpen was kind of genius in a way because it brought all those creators together in a way that produced some really gorgeous books and really cool stories that just were unsustainable in the end because of business.
Mhm.
But I sat behind Laura for an afternoon and learned about color, color theory, light sources, stuff that you don't consider because when you're a writer, you just hand it off to the next person. And I think in order to truly understand the creative process and the writing process for comics, you got to know every point in it, and you have to respect every point. And one of my fondest memories is, going out to lunch on a Wednesday with, Butch and Mike and Steve Epting and Chuck Dixon and Tony Bedard and, all the people that were, in and around Rick Magyar, I'm leaving out names. And we went to lunch, and then afterwards we went to a comic shop. So I got to see what the creators read. I can tell you that Steve Epting is a huge Jim Aparo fan, and Butch Geist loves Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon. And so when you see the comic book influences of the people that you work with, I think you have a deeper understanding of who they are and how they approach the page. And so that's one of the best formative moments. And this is an industry where you work alone, you sit by yourself, and before the internet, before Zooming, and you send off your work, and then you wait for the next part to come back.
Mhm.
Really, I learned about the community of comics working for CrossGen. I learned how to make comics at DC. So I think both of them are very integral to what who I am and what I learned. Um, the other companies, I mean, I did one story for Dark Horse. I did a bunch of stuff for Dynamite. Um, and I only did one story for Dark Horse because I asked where my money was for my Star Wars story, and I guess that's verboten, to ask where your check is. Sorry, Dark Horse. I mean, but I speak truth there.
Okay.
But I've been pretty fortunate to work for a lot of different companies, and to write a lot of different characters. I never thought that I'd write the Phantom, but then I was paired off with Alex Ross, and he said, "Well, here's some designs. How can we reinvent this character?" I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe there's a Phantom who didn't want to be the Phantom." And I know that early on the Phantom fans, they weren't quite keen on what we were doing, but I think they warmed up to it later, and then by then we were done. But I've had a chance to work on a lot of different things, so I feel pretty blessed
Yeah,
to.
I mean, I obviously knew a lot of your DC work. I was not aware of all the other stuff you did for, for I knew about of Dynamite because I really dig their work too, but like certainly CrossGen and all the list of characters that you were a part of creating, I was astounded. It was huge, and when you said that you finally got the credit, um in Pennyworth, I believe you said it made me feel good because one, I'm a huge fan of giving, artists their due and giving the credit that's deserved to them. So, I mean, and seeing everything that you've done, I was astounded by it. And just
Oh,
like,
thank you.
when you have time to sleep, man, Uh,
Well, I mean, I think that, I mean, we're all fans of this. I think if you work in comics, you're a fan of it. So it's nice to see in the films that they are crediting like the stories that inspired the filmmakers.
mhm.
And I mean, I can think of any cooler thing than to see an adaptation of a story that you worked on the big screen with the big budget. Because prior to me breaking in, you mentioned Wizard in the casting call, there weren't any good superhero movies.
Right.
Batman in '88, and then a couple here and there thereafter. I remember covering Spawn, the movie, and thinking that, here's two guys from Lucasfilm that are doing the special effects. This is going to be spectacular. And then it was like, like we weren't quite there yet in terms of the
No.
effects and the seriousness really, just hitting at the same time to make the films what they were. And I thought that, Wizard was ahead of the game and like thinking about, because I mean, we cast Hollywood heavyweights who looked or acted like the characters that we would expect to see in the films. And if you look at, who eventually made it, I mean, we're probably 10 years too early. I think Tom Cruise, we probably, listed for Iron Man or for
Yeah.
something. But,
Yeah.
I mean, we had it on the money. And I know that we drove um, Dan Riley, who was our uh, production manager in charge of like acquiring art and everything, because he had to go through all of these Hollywood photo uh, houses in order to get the picture of that specific actor to do this sorts of things. So yeah, I mean
Now they
we're at a
have
time where
the retro castings of what would the Avengers look like in the 80s? What would they look like in the
oh yeah,
90s? Yeah.
yeah, all that AI stuff. Yeah, I just saw one recently that had the Justice League, and it had Harrison Ford as Batman, John Travolta as Superman,
Oh,
and I think Tom Cruise as the Flash. And had that very uncanny valley AI look to it. It was kind of weird. Yeah.
I just a couple more questions. I want to be
Okay.
mindful of your time, but you also did some work in animation,
Yeah.
specifically GI Joe and Transformers. My childhood, right there. I mean, come on.
Me too.
Uh,
Me too.
how did you get involved with that? And was that, what was the creative, the creative process like for you in that versus comics?
So the connection is that while I was at ToyFare, I became friends with Aaron Archer, and Aaron was sort of the guy who was in charge of Transformers and sort of the big resurgence of Transformers at Hasbro. And as a product manager, he's also the guy who created Total Justice, the Total Justice figures,
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
the really stylized poses with the clip-on fractal tech gear.
Yes.
So after leaving Wizard, I maintained that connection and relationship. And Aaron called me up one day and he said, "Hey, can you come up to Hasbro?" So I went up to Hasbro. They flew me up and they offered me a job. This is right around Hasbro was able to see the future, and they saw that a lot of their intellectual properties, that toy sales were starting to go down, but they were getting into movies. And so Hasbro hired me as a consultant, and my job was to read the GI Joe scripts from Devil's Due and other publishers, read Transformer scripts, and to comment on them, and to kind of educate Hasbro on what to look for in quality stories, and consider the publishing aspects of these things. And this was around the same time that the Transformers first film came out, and the GI Joe film was in the works. So I did this for about 3 years, where they'd send me just a ton of stuff, and I'd read it and comment on it, and have like a weekly meeting with the Hasbro powers and just talk about the publishing aspect. And then one year, Aaron came back to me and said, "We want to do some animation. What's your availability?" And I'm like, "Well, totally available." So I was offered the job to script GI Joe Operation Hiss and Transformer Cyber Missions. And these were animations that were made strictly for the web. Hasbro was starting a website called The Hub that was going to be kind of a place to, both buy toys and also have the toys and all the IPs promoted. And so these were little web animations about, 2 or 3 minutes each, but were part of a longer story that told, Cyber Missions was about, Transformers, beating each other up,
Hmm.
you know, big cars
That
crashing.
happens. Yeah.
And GI Joe Operation Hiss was about them creating this nanite virus thing that's kind of like that was in the film that would
Hmm.
consume stuff. And so they paired it off with two different animation studios and took my scripts, and I got to write these kind of cool fun animation. Looks totally dated today. It is very that early CGI look. Kind of dead-eyed,
Right.
sort of clunky. But it was a ton of fun to do. Had some great voice acting, and it was a great um, animation 101, because I had to write the scripts and kind of edit the scripts and kind of fit that format. So I had a blast working on it. And
That's awesome.
that continued my relationship with Hasbro. So, long story short, I eventually worked myself out of a job because I taught Hasbro how to do what I do, and they kind of ran with it. Now they become kind of an intellectual property company, like an entertainment company, not just a toy company.
Yeah, but they got to do it right though. That's the problem. They, they're off the mark.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like they didn't realize then that, when you license out your properties, that you kind of need quality behind it. Because I think they sort of like licensed out the Joe books and the Transformer books, and then eventually too they had the stuff from Wizards of the Coast, the Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and that they just thought, they sort of licensed it and then forgot about it. But they wanted to know, well, what's going to make this good? How is this going to, synergistically promote what we're doing in house? And so they kind of needed to get up to speed on how to write comics and how to edit comics. So I
Yeah. I
made
mean,
myself redundant, which is not a bad thing, I guess.
that's happened to us nowadays, unfortunately. Um, Scott, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has
Oh,
been,
Joe, thanks for having me.
I could probably talk to you another hour or so, but I don't think my kids would appreciate that. But um, no, in all honesty, your career is absolutely fascinating, and you've worked on so many great characters and properties and stories, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and be on this little fledgling show of ours. So thank you so much. Where can fans follow you? And do you have anything coming up soon that we can look out for?
Yeah. So my author's blog is called Dialogue to Follow. So if you type in my name, Scott Beatty, two T's and Scott and two T's and Beatty, and Dialogue to Follow, that should take you to it. It's scottbeatty.blogspot.com. And I promote things that are coming up, things that are being reprinted. Every so often I'll throw in an essay. I wrote about my first comic book counter from a comic book store, which is now my current comic book counter. It's at my current comic book shop, ironically or weirdly.
That's
Um,
cool.
I have two big things. The Nightwing Year One 20th anniversary hardcover edition is coming out August 6th. And I just blogged about that. It's actually a really cool edition because it has my original notes. It has the original email kind of like back and forth between Chuck and me describing it, also the original proposal, a full script from one of the issues, and about 20 pages of sketch work from Scott McDaniel. So it's almost a how-to book on how the comic series was made. 200 pages. It comes in a slipcase for $29.99. It's still pretty
Okay.
affordable. Brand new cover by Scott. There's an alternate direct market cover by Dan Mora. So that's in
Oh yeah.
August. And then in September, DC put all 3 year ones in a box set. So Robin
Oh,
Year One, Batgirl Year One, and Nightwing Year One. And that is coming out the first week of September. So it's really cool because every edition of Nightwing has sold out. And I'm astounded, like if I go on eBay, like the last Nightwing Year One hardcover sells for $200. So
wow.
they're finally keeping it in print and offering it to new readers. Um, Batgirl Year One's in like 9 different languages. So like those for 20 years, those books have been consistently in print, and I'm proud of them. I think it's probably some of the best stuff I've ever written, and I'm happy to see that it's still finding an audience, in a new generation of readers. So those are the two big things, and I've got some other irons in the fire, as always, as any writer. So it's kind of too
Good.
early to talk about that, but my blog and my Wikipedia page, which I have to admit I edited to be right because the
Good.
original page had some inaccuracies. So I added everything that I've ever written to my Wikipedia page. So it's a good place to figure out, if you're looking for stuff, where I've worked, what the additions are, and occasionally I'll pop in and just update it to say what's
I
coming up. So
I can agree with that because I looked at that um before we spoke, and that's how I knew you did so much. So
yeah, it's funny because Wikipedia is, largely, written by 100, monkeys in a room with 100 typewriters,
yeah.
um, and can be edited by anyone. But I made it correct for me because I think that it's no better resume than to show where I've worked and what I've written than there. So the DC Wiki says that I started in 1987, and I can tell without irony that I was graduating from high school then. So if I was working in comics, it's the second best story next to Jim Shooter, but I was
I
so
was gonna say like that'd be kind of cool,
yeah, no.
And we're back. How cool is Scott? He's had such a great career. He's worked on so much. And if you haven't done so, I highly recommend checking out the DC encyclopedias. I get them every couple of years when they come out, and they're just so much fun and great reference material to learn about all the characters nowadays. My son just loves digging through them and learning about all these new characters. Also, if you haven't done so, look, a lot of people say a lot of not so nice things about Wikipedia, but it plays a role. Scott is one of few people I think that actually curates his Wikipedia page, and he goes in there and makes sure everything is accurate, keeps it honest, and has listed everything that he's worked on. So if you really want to get a full breadth of what he's done, go check it out. It's long. So yeah, it was great talking to Scott, learning about his career. I mean, look, he's a Dollar Bin Bandits fan, so how bad could that be? So before we go, also want to give a shout out to Mark Florio. He gave us a 5-star rating, an absolutely fabulous review. Mark, thank you so very much. We really appreciate that. Also, the CBC award nominations are open, so have a go. Go check that out. That's at cbcawards.org. Click on Nominate Now, and just fill in Dollar Bin Bandits for everything. Just everything that's there. No, don't do that because we'll probably get in trouble for it. But check out the categories. Put in Dollar Bin Bandits for, whatever makes sense. And we really appreciate it. And hey, look, if you guys enjoyed this episode as much as we did recording it for you, please rate, review, and subscribe like Mark did. And, we'll make sure we keep this train moving along. All right, guys? We can't do this without you. So until next time, have a good one, guys. Take it easy.